What happens when a 10-minute speech shakes the walls of Oxford and destroys a man's life forever? A room filled with scholars, a secret that burns through centuries of power, and a confrontation that turns deadly. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear will change the way you see history, corruption, and betrayal. The Grand Hall of Oxford University shimmered in golden light. Tall windows let in the soft glow of an autumn afternoon. Dust particles floated lazily in the air, like tiny stars in a forgotten galaxy. The room was silent. Hundreds of eyes fixed on one figure at the podium. Ibrahim Traoré stood tall in his military uniform, the green sash across his chest glowing under the chandeliers. His boots clicked against the polished floor as he approached the microphone. At the far end, Professor Edward Whitmore sat at an oak desk. His fingers tapped nervously on an open book, though he was no longer reading. The sound of boots echoed in his ears, louder than any lecture bell he had ever heard. The hall smelled of old paper and polished wood, a scent of tradition and power. Yet something in the air felt sharp, electric, like a storm waiting to break. Traoré's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Deep, measured. Every word rolled like thunder in a clear sky. "Knowledge without courage is slavery," he said. The sentence hung in the air like a curse. I shifted toward Whitmore. Some stared. Others smirked. The professor's throat tightened. He forced a smile, but his palms were slick with sweat. The temperature in the hall felt higher now, though the windows were open. A bead of sweat slid down his temple, catching the golden light like a tear of guilt. Traoré walked closer to the edge of the stage. His eyes locked on Whitmore. Cold, unblinking. A hunter measuring the weakness of his prey. "You speak of ethics in your books," Traoré continued, his tone calm, almost gentle. "But you sell the blood of my people in your investments." A gasp ran through the hall. It was sharp like glass breaking on marble. Whitmore froze. His breath stopped halfway in his chest. The pages of his open book trembled under his shaking hands. He wanted to speak, to deny, to explain, but the weight of hundreds of eyes crushed his voice. Traoré's words kept coming, steady as a drumbeat in a funeral march. 10 years of lectures. 10 years of profits from the same corporations that burn our villages. The silence in the hall deepened, heavy as a coffin lid. The only sound was the faint hum of a distant clock, marking each second like a hammer on steel. Whitmore felt his vision blur. The chandeliers above seemed to sway, melting into a haze of light and shadow. His ears rang with the memory of his own voice, preaching morality in packed classrooms. The same morality he had sold for shares and dividends. Traoré's boots struck the stage as he stepped down. One sound, then another, each louder than the last, like the march of judgment itself. Whitmore gripped the edge of the desk, his nails digging into the wood. His knuckles whitened as his world cracked open. The murmurs began, soft at first, then growing like an approaching storm. He heard his name whispered, sharp and cold as broken glass. The soldier stopped just a few feet away. Traoré's shadow stretched long across the floor, swallowing the professor's desk in darkness. His voice was low now, almost a whisper, yet it carried like a gunshot. "Tell them, Professor. Tell them how much a soul costs in your world." The room spun. The light, the faces, the whispers, all fused into a single, suffocating blur. Whitmore opened his mouth, but no words came. His tongue felt heavy, like stone. His lungs burned. The air was gone. His chair scraped loudly against the floor as he stumbled to his feet. The sound cracked through the silence like a gunshot in a cathedral. Eyes followed him. Rows of students, colleagues, and guests, all staring, unblinking, waiting. Whitmore's breath came in shallow bursts. His chest heaved like a man running through smoke. Every step toward the podium felt like walking into a furnace. The oak panels of the hall seemed to close in. The scent of old leather and ink turned sour in his throat. His knees trembled beneath the heavy folds of his academic gown. Traoré did not move. He stood calm, unshaken, his eyes burning with the cold fire of judgment. His silence was louder than any words. Whitmore gripped the edge of the podium. His fingers were white and rigid. The microphone loomed before him like the mouth of a beast waiting to devour his last breath. He opened his mouth. Nothing came, only the dry rasp of air scraping his throat. The hall was still, so still that he could hear the faint creak of the floorboards under his shoes. Somewhere, far above, a bell chimed the hour. Each toll echoed like the ticking of his own doom. His voice cracked. A whisper, frail and broken. Eyes narrowed. Phones lifted silently into the air, their black screens glinting like mirrors of judgment. "I have nothing to hide," he said at last, but the words were hollow. They fell dead between the pillars, swallowed by the weight of truth hanging in the air. Traoré stepped forward. Just one step. The sound of his boots slammed against the wood like a hammer of war. "Then explain this," he said. His hand reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder. Thick, heavy, marked with the crimson seal of a corporation known for devastation in Africa. Gasps burst like sparks. A sharp crackle of disbelief filled the hall. Whitmore's eyes widened, glassy and terrified. The blood drained from his face as the folder opened. Inside were pages, contracts, signatures, transactions. Every line a blade, every number a nail in his coffin. The professor's legs buckled. He sank to his knees, his robe pooling like a shadow of disgrace around him. Whispers rose to a roar. A tide of voices, sharp and merciless, crashing down on the ruins of his dignity. Traoré's voice boomed once more, calm yet lethal. "The world knows now, Professor." Whitmore lifted his head. His eyes were hollow. The hall blurred before him, a whirl of light and faces twisting into judgment. Then, the lights flickered. For a second, the hall was swallowed in shadow. Gasps rippled through the crowd. When the chandeliers blazed back to life, every eye was on Whitmore. He was still on his knees. His lips trembled. His fingers clawed at the polished floor as if he could dig a hole to escape. A single phone flash cut through the dimness like lightning. Then another, and another. Dozens of screens glowed, capturing every second of his humiliation. His name began to spread across whispers like a curse set free. Twitter, Instagram, news feeds already alive with scandal. Whitmore's vision blurred again, but this time it was not fear alone. His chest ached. A sharp pain stabbed under his ribs, twisting like a knife. He clutched his gown, his breath tearing from him in ragged gasps. The hall erupted. Chairs scraped. Someone shouted for a doctor. Another voice cried out for water. But Traoré did not move. He stood firm, his face unreadable, his eyes locked on the fallen man, as if watching the inevitable judgment of history. Whitmore's body curled, his forehead pressing against the cold wood of the floor. His heart pounded like a drum of war, then faltered, a beat skipping like a broken clock. And then silence, the kind of silence that feels alive. Heavy, absolute. All that remained was the echo of Traoré's last words lingering in the air. "The world knows now." The professor's hand twitched once, then stilled. Gasps turned to screams. Students stumbled from their seats. Phones filmed everything. The world outside was already watching. And Traoré, he turned slowly, his boots echoing through the chaos, and walked out of the hall without a word. The door closed behind him like the lid of a coffin. But this was not the end, because the truth he carried was far from finished. The next revelation would shatter more than one life. Outside the hall, the air was sharp with the chill of autumn. Leaves swirled across the ancient stone courtyard like fragments of torn letters. Traoré walked with slow, deliberate steps, the sound of his boots echoing against the arches. Behind him, sirens wailed faintly as an ambulance rushed through the cobbled gates. The grand doors of the hall slammed shut, sealing in the chaos. He did not look back. Not once. His hands rested calmly behind his back, the folders still clutched under his arm like a weapon that had already struck its blow. Reporters swarmed to the gate, their voices rising like a storm. Cameras flashed, turning the dusk into a frenzy of white fire. Questions hurled through the air like arrows. Did you plan this? Is it true about the professor's investments? Will Oxford face an inquiry? Traoré's jaw tightened, but he spoke no word. Only his eyes moved, cold, unyielding, burning with a mission greater than this single hall of power. Then his phone vibrated. Once, twice. A name appeared on the screen, glowing like a beacon in the dark. Phase 2 ready. His grip tightened. The message pulsed like a heartbeat. Somewhere deep inside, something darker than vengeance stirred. He slipped the phone into his pocket and kept walking. Past the crowds, past the gates, toward the black car waiting at the edge of the street, engine humming like a predator ready to pounce. Inside the car, the man in the driver's seat spoke without turning. "It is done." Traoré slid into the leather seat, his shadow stretching across the dim interior. "It is only beginning," he said. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a storm. The car rolled away, its tires whispering against the wet stones. Behind them, Oxford glowed under the orange sky like an old kingdom watching its walls crack. Inside the hall, chaos deepened. Paramedics fought to revive Whitmore, their voices sharp and urgent. Students cried. Some cheered. Some stared in stunned silence, the glow of their screens reflecting a truth too raw to swallow. But no one knew the full truth yet. Not the students, not the faculty, not even the world that was already devouring the headlines. Because the folder Traoré carried was only one piece. One fragment of a secret that reached far beyond Oxford, far beyond England, into boardrooms, into governments, into shadows where power wore no face. And now, that secret was about to burn its way into the light. The car slid through narrow streets, headlights cutting silver blades through the fog. Rain began to fall, soft at first, then harder, drumming against the roof like war drums in the distance. Traoré stared out the window, his reflection fractured by raindrops. His eyes did not blink, not once. In them burned the weight of decades, the screams of villages, the smoke of burned homes, the silence of graves that no one remembered. The driver spoke again, voice low and taut. "They will come after you now." Traoré did not answer immediately. His fingers traced the edge of the folder on his lap, feeling the sharpness of the paper inside. Finally, he said, "Let them come." The car merged onto a wider road. The glow of Oxford faded behind them, swallowed by the darkness of the countryside. Ahead, only black trees and a winding path stretched towards something unseen. His phone buzzed again. Another message. Another name. Target 2 confirmed. Geneva. His jaw set like stone. Geneva. The city of treaties, of polished lies, of hands that signed death behind doors draped in velvet. Phase 2 would not just shatter reputations. It would break the spine of an empire built on blood. The car stopped in front of an old manor house hidden behind iron gates. Its windows glowed faintly, like eyes watching in silence. Inside waited men who did not wear uniforms, who did not carry flags, yet who commanded the fate of nations with whispers. Traoré stepped out into the rain. The cold bit into his skin, but he walked as if the storm belonged to him. Each drop gleamed on his beret like molten steel. The door opened before he touched it. A man stood inside, tall, lean, dressed in a black suit that seemed to swallow the light. His voice was calm, but there was an edge beneath it. "You started a war today." Traoré walked past him without stopping. "No," he said. "I answered one." The hall smelled of leather and smoke. Maps stretched across the walls like scars of the earth, marked with pins and lines that pulsed with the red veins of conflict. At the far end of the room stood a table stacked with documents and screens glowing with encrypted feeds. A woman rose from the shadows, her eyes sharp as blades. "They will kill you for this," she said. "They will try," Traoré replied, his voice like granite. "But they cannot kill what they do not understand." He placed a folder on the table. Paper slid free like silent knives, spilling the names of banks, oil giants, mining conglomerates, and governments that smiled in daylight while feasting in the dark. The woman's breath caught as her eyes raced down the list. This will burn everything." "That is the point," Traoré said. His gaze lifted toward the map, his shadow stretching across Europe, Africa, and beyond. This is not about Oxford. This is about every chain they forged around our necks. The room fell silent. Only the sound of rain beating against the windows remained, like the relentless march of time. Then the screen on the table flickered. A face appeared, smooth, calm, framed in perfect light. An old man in a dark suit. The kind of man whose voice had moved armies without ever lifting a hand. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Ibrahim," he said slowly, his tone like silk hiding steel. "I have been waiting for you." The voice from the screen rolled through the room like distant thunder. Smooth, measured, deadly. Traoré stood still, his jaw locked, his eyes fixed on the old man's face glowing on the screen. Behind that calm smile was an empire, the kind that never needed a flag to rule. The man spoke again, his voice dripping with the kind of certainty that came from decades of unchecked power. "You think this changes the game," he said softly. "It does not. You only revealed your position." The rain hammered harder against the windows, a frantic drumbeat to a war that had not yet begun. The woman beside Traoré tensed. Her hand hovered near the inside of her coat. Every nerve in the room seemed to tighten like a drawn bowstring. Traoré's voice came low, steady, each word carved in iron. "I did not come here to change the game." He leaned forward, his shadow swallowing half the table. "I came here to end it." The old man chuckled. Not loud, not forced. A quiet laugh colder than steel. Bold words for a soldier who still bleeds when cut. The screen flickered. For a second, the old man's image fractured, glitching into static, then clearing again. But now his smile was gone. His eyes burned with something darker. "You have no idea how deep this runs," he said, voice sharp now, stripped of its velvet mask. "Every government, every bank, every alliance, they all belong to us. And you are nothing but a man with a folder." Traoré stepped closer to the screen, his boots thudding on the wooden floor like the slow beat of a war drum. He placed both hands on the table, leaning into the light. "Then you should fear what one man with the truth can do." The old man's lips curved, but it was not a smile. It was the thin edge of a blade. "You will not live to see it." The screen went black. The hum of the rain filled the void like the hiss of 1,000 snakes. Traoré stood unmoving, his reflection rippling faintly in the dead monitor. The woman spoke, her voice tight. "He knows where we are." "I want him to know," Traoré said. His tone was quiet, but the words burned like coals. "This is war now, and wars are not fought in shadows anymore." He turned toward the map on the wall, his eyes sweeping over Europe, Africa, and the thin red lines that bound them together like veins of corruption. "We strike Geneva next. No delays." The man in the black suit, the one who had opened the door, stepped closer. But his movement was wrong. Too smooth, too quiet. The woman noticed first. Her hand shot for her weapon. Too late. A gunshot tore through the room. The sound cracked like lightning, splitting the sky. The woman staggered back, blood blooming across her shoulder. She hit the floor hard, her breath ragged. Traoré spun, his eyes locking on the man in black. The barrel of a silenced pistol stared back at him, cold and unblinking. The man's face shifted, expressionless, like a mask peeling away. "You really believed you could walk into this and live?" he said, his voice like ice splintering in the dark. "We have been inside your circle since the beginning." Traoré did not flinch. He stared straight into the muzzle, his pulse pounding like war drums in his ears. Then, slowly, his lips curved, not in fear, but in something colder, something sharper. "Then you know," he said, his voice like a blade sliding free of its sheath, "that when you shoot me, you ignite the fire you cannot control." The man's finger tightened on the trigger. The rain outside roared like 1,000 marching soldiers. And then, the lights died. The entire manor plunged into blackness, swallowing the room in silence and shadow. A split second later, an explosion ripped through the east wing. The walls shuddered. Glass shattered. A wave of heat punched through the hall, slamming the gunman off balance. Traoré moved like a predator unchained. He slammed his elbow into the man's wrist, twisting hard. Bone cracked. The gun clattered to the floor, swallowed by darkness. Another blast rocked the building, this one closer. Sparks rained from the ceiling like burning rain as emergency lights flickered on in streaks of blood-red glow. Shadows danced across the maps on the wall, making the borders bleed crimson. The man in black lunged with a knife, his teeth bared, his face twisted into something inhuman. Traoré caught his arm mid-strike, steel biting inches from his throat. Their muscles locked, straining, sweat and rain dripping like molten fire between them. The woman on the floor groaned, clutching her bleeding shoulder. Her hand scrabbled for the pistol that had fallen near the table. Her fingers brushed cold steel. Traoré drove his knee into the attacker's gut, ripping a grunt from his lungs. The knife slipped. Traoré seized it, spun, and buried the blade to the hilt in the man's chest. The body jerked once, twice, then slumped like a marionette with its strings cut. Blood spread across the floor in a slow, glistening pool, reflecting the red emergency lights like liquid fire. Traoré yanked the knife free, his breath coming hard but steady. He turned to the woman, who was dragging herself upright, her face pale but fierce. "Are you alive?" he asked. "Barely," she hissed, her voice sharp with pain. "But I told you they would come." Traoré crouched beside her, checking the wound. It was bad, but not fatal. He tore a strip from his uniform and bound her shoulder tight. Above them, the manor groaned. Flames licked the far corridor, smoke curling like black serpents through the broken windows. The sound of boots pounded from outside, shouts in the storm, heavy engines growling closer. "They are here," the woman whispered. Her eyes darted toward the shattered window. More of them. Traoré's gaze swept the room. The folder, the maps, the screens, still flickering faintly even through the smoke. He grabbed the folder and stuffed it inside his coat. Then he pulled a small device from his pocket, a black box no larger than a fist, its surface gleaming with a single red light. The woman stared at it, her eyes widening. "Is that?" "Yes," Traoré said. His voice was iron. "No one leaves with this data, except me." He pressed the button. A soft hum began to rise, deep and hungry. Somewhere in the walls, something armed itself with a sharp metallic click. The woman's voice trembled for the first time. "You're going to bring the whole house down." Traoré rose to his full height, the knife still dripping in his hand. His shadow stretched across the burning wall, tall and unyielding. "That is the idea." The door burst open. Black-clad soldiers stormed in, rifles raised, their visors glowing in the red haze like the eyes of demons. Traoré moved first, fast, silent, a blur of fury and steel. And behind him, the hum grew louder, deeper, counting down like the heartbeat of a monster waiting to awaken. The first soldier fell before he could fire. Traoré's knife slashed across his throat, spraying crimson in the red-lit haze. He snatched the man's rifle before it hit the floor and spun, sending a burst of fire into the next two. The room exploded into chaos. Gunfire roared like thunder inside the tight walls. Sparks spat from shattered screens. Flames leapt higher, painting the air in orange and black. The woman crawled behind the heavy oak table, dragging herself with one good arm, blood smearing across the polished floor. She reached for a fallen pistol, aimed with trembling hands, and dropped a soldier with two sharp cracks. "Left side," she screamed. Traoré pivoted, spraying bullets into the doorway where shadows moved like predators. 3 soldiers went down, their bodies twisting in the strobe of muzzle flash. The hum in the walls deepened, vibrating through the floor like the growl of a buried beast. The red light on the black device pulsed faster now, like a heartbeat running out of time. Traoré fired until the rifle clicked empty. Then he hurled it aside and dove for another weapon. But before his hands closed around the steel, a boot slammed into his ribs, flipping him onto the burning floor. A masked soldier loomed over him, rifle aimed at his chest. The black visor reflected the flames, hellfire trapped in glass. The man's finger curled around the trigger. Then he stopped. His hand trembled. Slowly, he reached up, and tore the mask away. The face beneath froze Traoré where he lay. A face carved into his memory like a scar. A face that should have been buried years ago. "Brother," the man said. His voice was low, rough with smoke and years of silence. "You should never have come back." For a moment, the world narrowed to that single word. Brother. The roaring fire, the gunfire, the screams, they all dissolved into a ringing void. Traoré's eyes burned with something colder than rage, something older than war. "You," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "They told me you were dead." The man's grip tightened on the rifle. "I was," he said softly, "until they gave me a reason to live." The hum in the walls became a scream now, the floor trembling underfoot. The timer was almost done. The house was seconds away from becoming a firestorm. The man stepped closer, his rifle steady, his eyes like burning coals. "You are not leaving here alive, Ibrahim," he said. "Not this time." Traoré moved in a blur. His hand shot to his belt, wrenching free a flash grenade. The pin ripped out with a metallic scream. "Neither are you," he said. Then the world became white fire. The blast swallowed the room in searing white light. Sound vanished. There was no gunfire, no screams. Only a silent void torn apart by fire. Then the roar came. A wall of heat slammed through the hall, hurling bodies like broken dolls. Wood splintered. Glass shattered into a rain of knives. The manor cracked, as if the earth itself had opened beneath it. Traoré hit the floor hard, his ears ringing, lungs burning with smoke. His body screamed with pain, but his mind was steel. He rolled, snatched a fallen rifle, and dragged himself through the firestorm. The woman was gone. So was the table. Everything was rubble and flame. Through the smoke, a shape moved, tall, dark, staggering but alive. His brother. Half his mask burned away, blood streaking his face, but his eyes still burned like coals. The rifle in his hands gleamed through the haze. "You should have stayed in the grave they dug for you," Traoré shouted over the inferno. His brother's laugh was hoarse, ragged, but it cut through the fire like broken glass. "And you should have never left home," he spat. "They own everything, Ibrahim, even you." Bullets screamed through the flames. Traoré dove behind the cracked remains of a marble pillar as the rounds chewed stone into dust. Sparks rained down. The heat clawed at his skin like living fire. The hum became a piercing wail. The device had seconds left. One breath. Two. Traoré lunged from cover, firing as he ran. His brother moved too, both men shadows in a world of burning light. The rifles clicked empty almost at the same time. And then, the final beep. A sound like the heartbeat of a dying god. The explosion tore the world apart. The floor split. The ceiling collapsed in a cascade of fire and stone. Everything became smoke, blood, and chaos. Traoré felt himself thrown into the night. Cold air bit his face as he crashed into the wet grass beyond the manor's shattered walls. He rolled, coughing, his hands clawing for anything solid. Behind him, the manor was a tower of flame ripping the black sky open. Screams echoed, swallowed by the roar of the collapsing roof. And through it, through the fire and smoke, he saw a figure, his brother, standing in the inferno like a phantom, his silhouette black against the wall of flames. Alive, unbroken, and smiling. Then the fire consumed him, or so it seemed. Traoré staggered to his feet, blood dripping down his arm, his breath ragged. The folder was still under his coat, charred but intact. Phase 2 lived. In the distance, engines roared. Black vehicles tearing down the muddy road, headlights slicing through the smoke. They were coming. Traoré stumbled into the trees, his boots sinking into the rain-soaked earth. Each step was pain, but his mind burned brighter than the fire behind him. This was not the end. Not yet, because in the heart of that inferno, a promise had been made. A war not of nations, but of blood. And somewhere his brother still walked, waiting. The storm above cracked with thunder, like the sky itself declaring the beginning of something no one could stop. The forest swallowed him whole, the sound of engines fading behind the curtain of rain. Branches clawed at his uniform, and mud clung to his boots, but he moved with the unbroken rhythm of a man who had nothing left to lose. He reached a clearing where an old stone bridge arched over a swollen river. A single car waited beneath its shadow, black and silent, its lights dimmed against the storm. The door opened. The woman sat inside, pale and wounded, her shoulder bound in blood-stained cloth. She stared at him with hollow eyes, but when their gazes met, she nodded once. "You still have it." Traoré pulled the charred folder from his coat. Its edges were blackened, pages scorched, but the truth inside was untouched. He placed it on the seat beside her and slid in. The driver turned without a word, tires hissing over wet stone. The bridge fell behind them, swallowed by mist and rain. Ahead lay only darkness, and Geneva beyond it, gleaming like a fortress of glass and lies. Traoré leaned back against the seat, his breath ragged, his muscles screaming from the battle. But in his eyes burned something no fire could consume. Resolve, vengeance, and a purpose that could not be bought or broken. Behind them, far across the forest, the manor lay in ruins. Its flames clawed at the sky like the last cries of an empire dying in silence. But somewhere in that wreckage, a shadow still lived. A shadow that wore his blood and his past like armor. The war was no longer a whisper in dark rooms. It was awake now, and it would not stop until the world saw what power truly costs. Traoré closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of what was coming. When he opened them, the lights of the highway glimmered like a path of fire leading into the heart of the storm. He spoke at last, his voice low, steady, carved from iron. Phase 2 begins now. The car vanished into the rain, carrying with it the spark that would ignite the world. And so it ended, not with peace, not with silence, but with the first breath of a war that had only just begun.